Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show with Davin Salvagno. I am so excited to be talking to him today. He is an inspirational speaker known worldwide, and he is making a significant impact in organizations and culture in the world today. He's got a couple best-selling books. He has a Purpose Point Summit and a lot of other things that we're going to talk about. But for those that don't know him, because we've been focusing a little bit more on hearts and minds and personal aspects of things, but for those that maybe don't know a lot about his background, I asked Davin to maybe just sum up a little bit like of your experience, because I know you have so much. You have a wealth of experience and knowledge in business and leadership. So for those that maybe aren't as familiar, can you just fill them in right now and let them know a little bit more about your background?
Oh, Sonna, thank you. That's so kind. And again, it's great to be here. And for those of you who are just tuning in, this is a first. We're getting to do this from my car, and that was not expected today. But this show is all about overcoming different trials and things that go on in our life. And much of my career was that. Much of my career was overcoming different trials and challenges. But the first of which was I went to school to be a teacher. I have a passion for teaching. I have a passion for inspiring, passion for educating people, I'd always thought that I would be a teacher. Certainly not for the high pay or the summers off or any of those things, but because teachers left an indelible mark on my life as a kid, and they made a tremendous impact on me, and I wanted to pay that forward in life. And so I went to school to be a teacher, but I never became one in terms of teaching students. I got caught up in corporate America while I was putting myself through school. I had the tremendous opportunity to work at Costco and met Jim Sinegal, the founder and CEO of Costco. And I had a interaction with him 23 years ago that changed my life. Jim walked in one day and he was wearing a name badge that said Jim, and came up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Jim. What's your name?" And I said, "I'm Davin." And of course, he knew my name was Davin because I was wearing a name badge that said Davin. But Jim wanted to make a personal connection with me, and that's why he said, "Hi, I'm Jim. What's your name?" And then he said this. He said, "Davin, tell me, what is it that we're doing well at Costco, and what could we be doing better?" He was a walking, talking engagement survey before engagement surveys were a thing. And then he followed that question up with this. He said, "Davin, what are your goals and dreams? And by working at Costco, will you achieve those?" And that question blew my mind because I'm sitting here going, this is the founder and CEO of the company, and he cares about what my goals and dreams are and whether or not by working at his company, I'm going to fulfill those. Now, the reason I tell that story is because that ended up shaping the rest of the entire trajectory of my career. I became a raving fan of Costco, great organization, worked with them for 7 years. I was playing hockey with the vice president of Macy's, actually in the parking lot of the hockey arena that I'm sitting in right now, which is pretty amazing.
Oh my
But I was
gosh.
playing hockey right here in this
Oh
arena
my
with the
gosh.
vice president of Macy's. First time I've ever been able to tell that as a part of the story.
Wow.
And he said, "Hey, we were talking about Costco and Jim," and he said, "Hey, can you come to Macy's? We need to sprinkle some of that culture stuff here at Macy's." And I thought the idea of going to an organization, because Costco was already a great company, I loved it there and everything, but I wasn't really going to contribute anything beyond what I was already contributing to it. So the idea of taking all this and spreading that goodness to another organization that can learn from that intrigued me. So they made me a great offer. I went to Macy's. I worked with them for 3 years. And then the bottom fell out in 2008. And between 2008 and 2010, Macy's went into survival mode. They were really just trying to survive that time. And so a lot of the initiatives and things that we were looking to do at that time, I wasn't able to do the way that we had hoped that we'd be able to do them. And a headhunter contacted me from CVS Health, and they asked me to come do the same thing for them. So I went to CVS Health and worked with them for 7 years in a kind of hybrid. I started in operations, then went into human resources, but the work was the same. We were focusing on really the purpose of the organization, what their purpose, mission, vision, values were, how that gets embodied, how we make a greater difference. There's a lot of big differences that we made over that 7 years. I had the opportunity to meet the founders of CVS. And one of the things that I was able to do there was connect this concept of not just what the organization's purpose is, but what was the purpose of the people that worked there? And were they aware of what it is that they were a part of? Did they connect their sense of individual purpose to the organizational purpose of the company? And I discovered something that Hubert Joly, who wrote The Heart of Business, calls human magic. at CVS, that when you can connect a person's individual purpose with the purpose of the organization they work for, everything changes. Performance levels skyrocket, fulfillment skyrockets, everybody does better. And I got enamored with this idea. And in 2016, decided that I was going to start a consulting company, call it Purpose Point, and focus on pretty much this conversation with organizations. And the rest was history. After that came the book Finding Purpose at Work and speaking tours and the Purpose Summit. And, here we are 8 years later.
Wow. Wow. And you have a new book that you're working on, correct? And
I
that's,
do.
that is,
So the
what
new
is the
book
title of that?
The new book is called The Thief of Purpose, and that is a tentative working title. The publisher might change the title, so by the
Right.
time
That's
it's
why I didn't
actually
want to say
released,
it
it might be done. That's right.
because when you and
But
I
but I
met, you're
think
like, I'm
it's
not sure.
that's right. I think we're still going to keep that for now. But it's The Thief of Purpose, and it's the first book, Finding Purpose at Work, was all about how you find purpose, identifying it both at work and in your life. This second book is about the things that rob us of our purpose. It's about the things that prevent us from experiencing the fullness of our potential and purpose. So things like comparison, competition, doubt, excuses, fear, unbelief. Each chapter is a different word, and we dive into stories where I personally struggled with those and how I had to overcome those, but then other people that I know who struggle with them and how they had to overcome them, and a lot of kind of rags to riches stories, if you will, of here's someone who was struggling with this, and then here's what happened when they stepped on the other side of it, and you can too, and here's how you do that. And so that book will be pre-released later this year, so stay tuned.
Wow, that sounds like a great book. I mean, wow. Yeah. Because, a lot of people, I love the fact that you bring up comparison and competition, and because that does hold a lot of people back. And what people don't realize, and I know that you'd agree, is that we're all authentic in our own way. We all have our own gifts. We all have our own strengths and our own essence and our own abilities. So, people get held back so often because of the fear, or, they have that imposter syndrome, or, they're looking at what everybody else is doing. And what we have to realize is that we are who we are and that we have our own wealth of experience, our own wisdom that we've gained, right?
That's exactly right. And that's the thing, is that we're so busy comparing our lives to the lives that other people are living that we miss out on the life that we're supposed to be living. And I actually, that's why comparison is the first chapter of the book, is because in my opinion, it's one of the greatest thieves that we all have in common. And so when you think about it, and I don't want to demonize comparison, because there's also a good side to comparison. In fact, one of my favorite quotes used to be, comparison is the thief of joy. And I used to say that all the time. And then I actually started to question the premise of that and said, well, really, is it? Because it really depends on what you're comparing yourself and who you're comparing yourself to. Because I can all of a sudden compare myself to people who've experienced far greater tragedies than I have, or who have
True.
significantly much left, right? You hear it said it could always be worse. And so we tend to not focus on comparing ourselves to those who are struggling more, or are in a different situation. Because if we did that, then now all of a sudden we experience gratitude. And gratitude actually leads to joy. So comparison in and of itself doesn't rob us of joy. And I had this debate one time with a class that I was teaching, and I wrote it on the board. Comparison, is it the thief of joy, yes or no? And we talked about it, and I said the same thing to them. And one of the students, his name's Easton, in the back of the room, his hand popped up into the air like his shoulder was going to pop off his arm was going to pop off his socket. And he said, you know what? Comparison is not the thief of joy. Envy is. And I was like, ooh, that is so accurate. So one of the things you got to think of is, when you're comparing yourself, are you experiencing envy? And then if you are, then yeah, that's a thief of joy. Now, I would argue it's also probably the thief of purpose in that moment. It's robbing you of something that you're supposed to be focusing on or doing, because you're too busy envying something that someone else is doing or that they have. So the way that you attack that thief is with gratitude. You stop immediately and you focus on, okay, well, let me compare myself to someone who doesn't have it as good, or is going through something much worse. And let me make a list of the things that I'm grateful for. And that's how you confront that thief and get your mindset back in a place where you can be experiencing the fullness of your purpose in that moment. And so that's an example, it's a taste of the
Hmm.
book.
Hmm.
But we all have that. We all have different things like that we're struggling with. It's what makes us very relatable as human beings, but it's also what prevents us most from being who we're supposed to be.
Right, right. And it's having that resilience to just keep going, even though these things set us back. I mean, what are your thoughts on resilience? And I mean, do you feel like you had to be resilient throughout your life, or do you feel like things kind of just took you from chapter to chapter? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
No, resilience has been such a theme of my life. In fact, if you listen to the first half of our show together, I mean, that's what we talked about, right? We talked about these massive crucial moments that I had to walk through that led to today. Being from Philly, one of my favorite movies is Rocky. And I mean, there's who doesn't love Rocky, right? But my favorite quote of Rocky's is when he says that, life isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, right? And that's not some cheap quote in a movie. That is a profound statement of truth, because we are constantly facing, whether it's adversity or setbacks or disappointment, and a lot of them sometimes are unexpected. But, do we have the ability to get back up each time we get knocked down? Because if we stay down there, as Rocky says, this world will, knock you to your knees, and it will keep you there if you let it. Right. And that's true. It's a true statement. But we have to be resilient if we're going to step into the fullness of who we were created to be, of all that awaits us, of everything that we're intended for. And the thing is we can't do it by ourselves, Sana. We need people around us who are
Right.
going to help us. One of the other pieces, it's interesting because if you think about it, the full picture of this, Rocky's the one who says that profound statement. But that happens in basically Rocky 6, right? Which is just called Rocky. But if you go back to the earlier Rockies, Rocky's the one in the corner with his eye bleeding, his nose bleeding, and ready to give up. And Mickey is screaming at him, get up, right? He had someone in his corner that
Yeah.
helped him be resilient to get up. And so we often don't talk about that. We just talk about the Rocky quote, which is great in and of itself, but we need people in our corner who are going to help us get up and speak life into us when life happens to us.
So true. I am so glad you shared that. It's really about empowering people and believing in people and being there to support them. Because as you know, we all have our fallbacks, we all have our challenges, and you're so right. It's about people being in your corner to help you be a light into the world. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as we're kind of talking about impacting the world, and you and I were talking after the talk when I had seen you about a month ago, and we had talked about having a ripple effect into the world and how important it is to really be authentic in our speaking and the messages that we're getting out into the world, because it does have a ripple effect. And as we all work on ourselves and we all find our purpose, our fulfillment, that is a ripple effect as well. And so back to my question before the break, I had said, if you had a magic wand, I mean, seeing all that you've seen in culture organizations throughout your life and the business world, if you had a magic wand and you could see something happen, like what would be the most desired thing that you would like to see happen in corporate America right now?
Hmm. So the number one thing that I would love to see happen would be a mindset shift of the purpose of business, of why it exists. Because here's the thing, I've seen this, I've seen too much to now know what I know, to not believe that everyone couldn't achieve the same thing. Like I've seen too much to say, there's no reason that every company can't do some of the amazing things that I've seen some amazing companies do. And a lot of them make excuses as to why that they don't do it. But here's what I mean when I say the purpose of business. Most businesses are using their people to build their business rather than using their business to build their people. And what I'm seeing happen is company after company after company they're standing up in this what we call the purpose economy. Aaron Hurst wrote a great book called The Purpose Economy in 2013. It was way ahead of its time. He said it was coming back then, but now we're living in it. We're living in the purpose economy. And it challenges the premise of what businesses exist to do. Patrick Lencioni, one of my favorite authors on the topic of
Mhm.
leadership, says that the purpose of every organization is to improve the quality of human life in some way. It's just a different way of saying use your business to build people. But historically, we've used people to build business, right? We have used people to gain more profits, to gain what we want. And I'm not demonizing profit. Profit can be a really great thing. In fact, I would argue that the companies that are using their business to build their people are experiencing higher levels of sustainable profit than those that are not. One of my favorite companies, WD-40, Gary Ridge, former CEO of WD-40, he was their CEO for 25 years. One of my dear friends. We do a lot of work together. We're working on a couple projects together right now, and he'll be speaking at the Purpose Summit in Charlotte in just a few weeks. But he was CEO of that company for 25 years, and they're one of the best examples of using a business to build people. Over the course of that 25 years, they experienced constant growth. And the more that they did it, the steeper that growth accelerated. Their engagement rates were record worldwide highs of 96% of employees who were engaged. And because of that, because they were highly profitable and they had highly engaged people, because they were focused on the people, they were highly profitable. And because they were highly profitable, in the 25 years that Gary was CEO, he never had to lay off a single employee. Not once.
Wow.
Not during the
Good to
Great
know.
Recession, not during COVID, not once did he have to lay off a single employee. Why? Because he focused on using the business to build people. Unfortunately, most companies that are using their people to build business, the second that things get hard, they sacrifice their people, right? We see layoffs, there's job cuts. They do all sorts of things for short-term gain because they're not thinking about long-term. And that's the big challenge today in America, and I would argue actually not just in America, but across the world, is that you have to have a long-term mindset and not a short-term mindset. You need to be clear about what your values are and not be willing to sacrifice those when times get tough. You need to be resilient, right? You need to stand for what you believe in, because the second that you compromise those things, people lose trust, they lose confidence, they lose faith in you, and it's really hard to get those things back. And that is what has led to the demise of most companies and most brands over the year, is that the second the times get tough, the number one thing that they sacrifice is their people. And so the one thing that I would change in business is just simply how we view it. Are you using people to build your business, or are you using your business to build your people? And then that's a whole different conversation on how you do that.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other show. But it's so true. It's so true. And like you said, people that want or the companies that want they're not seeing the long term. They want the instant results, the instant profits, and the instant gratification. And they're not really seeing the long term sustainability with profits and their employees. So that makes so much sense, even on a personal level, right? I mean, just all the choices and decisions we make in life, looking at them on a deeper level and long term as opposed to short term gratification.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's actually probably, it's not one of the thieves of purpose that I talk about, but it's an element of it. Is that a lot of times in any room that we're in, right? Especially if you're in professional services and you're networking, or you're doing, or if you're in sales, a lot of times you're not present in the moment, and you're not able to be your most authentic self because you're not thinking long term, you're thinking short term. And so many people on a daily basis are thinking about, where their next sale is going to come from, where their next lead's going to come from, where their next opportunity is going to come from. There were very self-focused individuals, and we focus on the present, not in terms of being a human being, but in terms of being a human doing. And we're so busy being human doings that we struggle to be human beings. And the difference is whether you have long-term or short-term thinking. Because if I have long-term thinking and I'm thinking 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the road, And I'm not trying to, use this moment for immediate gratification. And instead, I'm choosing to be fully present and just show up as my most authentic self and give people around me all of who I am in that moment, to be a good listener, to listen, to actually listen, to not respond, right? To not try and steer conversations, to be a human being. Well, that's how we build authentic relationships. And it's authentic relationships that lead to long-term opportunities. And those long-term opportunities usually yield results that are greater and more sustainable than the immediate gratification that we so often try to put our hands around. And so more people need to realize that the same exact problem that companies that we struggle with, a lot of them are nodding their heads like, yes, yes, yes. We struggle with that on an individual basis, right?
For
One of my
sure.
favorite movies, I'll say this. I know that was a long answer, but one of my
No, I
favorite
love it.
movies
It's
is the
great.
first.
It's very inspiring, and it's so true. It's so true. I'm so glad that you're sharing this.
Oh, well, thank you for providing the platform to do it. But, for those of you who've seen the Pursuit of Happiness, one of my favorite scenes in that, Will Smith is trying to, break out. He's being resilient. He's breaking out of this life of just that was really hard and trying to make something of himself, trying to provide for his son, right? And he has to go through all this stuff. And in order to do this, he has to be a top performer in the financial services sector. And he's cold calling, cold calling, cold calling, and he finally gets this unbelievable opportunity. A CEO answers the phone, invites him to go to the 49ers game. He goes to the 49ers game, and he's with all of these different big shots in the suite at the 49ers, stadium. And in the room, he starts trying to close deals. He starts handing out business cards and trying, and the CEO taps him on the shoulder and just says, "Stop. Just be present. Enjoy the game. Be with your son. Watch the football game. Make some friends." And then you find out that because he does that, the relationships that he then builds in that room lead to his long-term success. But if he didn't do that, if that CEO didn't tap him in the shoulder, no one in that room would have called him again. All of that opportunity would have been lost. He would have been highly transactional instead of highly relational, right? And on some
Yes.
degree, we've all been guilty of that in life.
No, I agree, but you're right. It's the transactional can, I mean, that can definitely spoil things. It's about the long-term connection and being able to build a foundation. Like you said, being present in the moment, listening. It goes such a long way, more than people can even imagine, really. I mean, I just think about some of the contexts that I've met throughout my life that down the road, I mean, you know how it all just kind of comes together in divine timing. So I totally believe that. So we're wrapping up a little here, but we have a few minutes left. And I want to ask you, Davin, what is life like for you now? What is your like what fulfills you today? Is it the same that was fulfilling you before? What's exciting going on? Just kind of give us a little overview of how things are now.
Well, things are very different now. I do prioritize time with my family and with my kiddos, and I'm grateful to be able to have the flexibility to be able to do that. Um, but one of the things that fulfills me most is when I see either a person or an organization that is out of step with their purpose and something that I either said or shared with them, or maybe I'm listening and I pose them a question and that light bulb goes off, right,
Mhm.
above that person's head, right, or the organization, and then they make a choice, they make a decision, and that inspiration doesn't just stay there, it moves to action. And because of that action, there's transformation. And then occasionally, I get a message, a text message, a social media message, a letter in the mail that simply says thank you. And then I look at that and I go, it was all worth it. And so I look forward to those moments constantly, of making that small little difference, creating that small little ripple effect in the world. I'm working on trying to do that more and more at home. I don't always get it right. I'm more present than I used to be. But that's what fulfills me most, is making that small difference in the lives of others and in organizations that then create that ripple effect far greater than I could have done it on my own.
You're living your purpose. You are totally 100% living your purpose, right?
That's
You're
right.
present, you're being a light, you're impacting the world in a positive way. And I can tell you're in a continual state of awareness. Like you are always striving to even become more present. And that's just so beautiful. I am so grateful to have you here today. I can't even tell you. And these are this show was really profound. I believe like people really need to hear this out there in the working world, in the corporate world, in every world, the personal world. It doesn't matter. It's such great wisdom that you've shared with us today, and I am truly grateful for you being here. So I feel that you've inspired me, and I'm not just saying that. Like I feel totally inspired. And we kind of started off in a little rockiness before the show. You're doing it from your car, and I had some things going on, and I'm just so grateful that everything worked out and we actually got to get into your heart and your mind a little bit and find out a little bit about your past and how you overcame those obstacles. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with our followers, our audience, our listeners. So I just want to thank everybody for listening today. Thank you, Davin Salvagno, for being here today. I appreciate you. And be sure to join me next week on the show at Up Close and Empowered, same time. And thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Sana.